At one point late last year, Fluffals became one of the popular Dark Horse decks, despite no real track record of success. Since its rise in popularity, Fluffals have still yet to convert this popularity into significant competitive achievement, and with the change in meta have seemingly fallen off in a sense, despite a quality Cosmo matchup. Despite this apparent fall off, what does my Fluffal deck look like? Starting off with the direct support, as these builds tend to do, Fluffal Dog is basically mandatory at 3, for it is even better than an auto +1 when normal or special summoned because the search is selective, so you can get exactly what you need and start a big combo string. And it's also the second highest main deck attacker in the arsenal, which allows it to kill a few things here or there on its own. Dog is a frequent jumping off point to the Fluffal OTK, either directly by searching for a card like Imp Sabre, or indirectly by searching for either Bear or Wings to set up your big deck thinning draw combination, and then you get what you need from that draw combination. Fluffal Leo is far too mediocre, for it brings nothing special to the party, as its effect is a measly 500 attack point increase only when it attacks, but the increase is not nearly enough to allow Leo to attack over anything important, especially monarchs. If this card could double its attack, jump from 16 to 3200 at the expense of its life upon the end of the battle phase, then it would be much more valuable. But unfortunately it doesn't, so skip it. In my opinion, Fluffal Bear was a general throwaway card until the birth of Wings, for before Wings, searching for Toy Vender was not important, as I felt it was much more efficient to just send Toy Vender to the graveyard via a card like Magical Hats for the purpose of OTK protection, as well as high-quality deck thinning and plussing. Basically, if Bear was run, it was run as Fluffal filler for fusions only. However, now with Wings, Bear has become quite important to Fluffals. Not surprisingly, I run 3 copies, both for fusion material and a search for vendor to increase the effectiveness of the Wings combination. Interestingly enough, Bear does have a second effect for polymerization recovery purposes, but this effect is hurt by requiring Bear to be on the field, which typically involves normal summoning it. In addition, tributing Bear takes away a potential fusion material. There are other means to better achieve polymerization recovery than Bear's second effect, so it basically acts as kind of an emergency code red effect. Edge Imp Saw struggles to justify its playability. Basically, Imp Saw is not a quality standalone monster. It demands a normal summons, not a special summons, to initiate its effect of discarding 1 fusion material, i.e. a Fluffal monster, to draw 2, and then return another to the top of the deck. Overall, this might not be a deal breaker if Imp Saw had more flexibility as fusion material. Unfortunately, Imp Saw can only be used as fusion material for Sabre-Tooth, like all Edge Imp monsters, and Leo, which is one of the worst fusion monsters in Fluffals in my opinion. Subpar effect, subpar fusion material, subpar stats equals not worth running. I want to like Fluffal Owl, but Owl typically will demand a normal summons to grab its polymerization, and its inherent fusion effect is too situational to place any real value on it. The problem with Owl is that in my experience it is just outclassed by King of the Swamps, which also searches polymerization without any normal summon utilization potential, but can also take the place of an imp monster for fusion purposes, providing more versatility. A number of people like Fluffal Sheep. I'm not a fan. The only monster that Sheep combos well with is Dog, because Dog is really the only Fluffal monster that is worth normal summoning in my opinion. As I just noted a moment ago, Owl is not worth it. Now, if Sheep allowed you to reveal it in hand, then return 1 Fluffal monster on the field to the hand to special summon another Fluffal monster in the hand to the field, then it would be great, providing effective versatility as well as a consistent means to produce advantage. However, that is not the case. The second Edge Imp related effect is also of limited value because Imp Sabre can summon itself at the cost of returning a card from your hand to the top of your deck, which you can combo off of with Toy Vender, and putting Chain on the field again to get another Frightfur card search is typically too situational to run a weak card like Sheep, when I think there are better options. In contrast to Fluffal Sheep, I am a fan of Fluffal Cat. Not only is it a critical yet generic fusion material, being a Fluffal, Cat is also one of 2 cards in the Fluffal arsenal that allows Fluffals to kind of laugh at Solemn Strike's ability to respond to Tiger's on summons destruction effect. Also, the ability to immediately recycle Polymerization helps extend plays from Tiger to Wolf in order to plow the opponent's field for an OTK with limited resources, or to go into Sabre-Tooth field control mode. I run 2 copies. Fluffal Rabbit is very similar to Fluffal Cat. Tie both Cat and Rabbit in the same fusion summon and significantly reduce the negatives associated with that summon, and almost always have the available resources to fusion again without requiring Frightfur Fusion. Unlike Cat, I only run 1 copy of Rabbit because I feel that getting Polymerization reuse is more important than 1 piece of fusion material. But that fusion material can definitely be useful. And since Rabbit is a Fluffal, thus highly searchable, it's not difficult to get it into your hand when you need it. I'm not a fan of Fluffal Mouse, because I view it as a home run card. Outside of providing a few more pieces of fusion material for more typically unneeded Tiger destruction, or again, typically unneeded Wolf attacks, it does little to actually help the deck win when the duel is not already flowing heavily in the Fluffal player's favor. Also, one has to run 3 copies to maximize the usefulness of its effect, which increases the probability of drawing multiples and having dead draws. Fluffal Wings is just one of the nastiest archetype-specific draw combo cards in the game. A typical play is to use Bear's effect to get Vender, activate the Vender, use its effect to dump Wings to draw 1 card, which one gets to if it's a monster, and potentially special summon something from the hand, then use Wings' effect from the graveyard to banish both Wings and Bear to draw 1 card, send Vender to the graveyard to draw another card, and then search off of Vender being sent to the graveyard. So for 2 cards, you draw 3 cards, potentially keeping all 3, and get a Fluffal monster search. If that didn't sound good enough, most of the time you will already have a second draw cycle set up to activate next turn if the duel continues that far, because it is highly likely you picked up a dog among those drawn or search for cards, which can then be used to get your +1 and exactly what you need to set up the next draw cycle. The only real question is whether to run Wings at 2 or 3 copies. In my experience, due to the searching ability of the deck, running 3 copies can get a little too inefficient because if a Vender is destroyed, then 1 Wings just became basically worthless outside of being fusion material. So I tend to favor running 2 copies over 3. Obviously, at least 1 Imp Sabre is needed for the deck, and that's all I run. Some may question only running 1 Imp Sabre, but because Sabre can special summon itself from the graveyard at the simple cost of returning 1 card in your hand to the top of your deck, is highly searchable, and is not really a good card on its own, in my experience, running multiples simply produces inefficiencies for the deck. I also run only 1 Imp Chain. Again, some may raise an eyebrow to such a strategy, especially due to its self-searching effect. But the biggest problem with Chain is that it is only fusion material for Sheep. And while Sheep is good, it's not really a game-breaking card. It also can be used for Sabre-Tooth, but Fluffals can also handle Sabre-Tooth summoning as well. The Frightfur card search is nice, but is not worth the inefficiency that I think multiple Imp Chains bring to the party. If there was at least 1 good searchable Frightfur card that didn't have to do with fusion summoning, then maybe multiple Imps would be useful, but that doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. Imp Edge Tomahawk would be useful if there were a wider variety of quality fusion monsters that relied on specific Edge Imp cards. Chain and Saw only have 1 fusion monster in Sheep and Leo respectively, and neither is that good, especially because you can get Sheep numerous ways. Basically, there's just not enough of a motivating factor to run Tomahawk for the name copy effect, and the burn effect is just rather pathetic. Both Edge Imp, Frightful Lloyd, and Fluffal Patchwork are low-quality cards with mediocre effects, especially for the fusion swarming capacity of Fluffals, and are nowhere near worth running. Frightfur Mad Chimera is not a bad card, but it's just not worth the effort. Frightfur Sabre-Tooth is definitely a better choice over Mad Chimera, as it allows for the summons of another Frightfur monster from the graveyard. Normally it's going to be the Frightfur monster that was used in the fusion summoning of Sabre-Tooth originally, as well as being at least a 2800 attack monster that typically you're going to summon this with at least 3 materials, so it's going to be a monster that cannot be destroyed as a result of battle or by card effect. Fluffal players know that Sabre-Tooth is pretty much the key stopper card against Cosmos. I run 2 copies. As discussed earlier, Frightful Leo is not a quality fusion target in my opinion, as it has substandard attack, its imp monster is also substandard, and its effect is alright, but due to the targeting aspect, it's become less versatile against the existing meta. I guess you could run it at 1 because you have the King of the Swamps to copy, but I just don't think it's worth it. I run 1 copy of Frightfur Bear, but not for the purposes of summoning it, but as a base for searching. Frightfur Wolf is a nice 1 copy card, because it is basically the OTK finisher after one has plowed the opponent's field with Tiger's effect and various other monsters, thus there should be no real concern with it being removed by almost any card. It attacks 3 to 4 times, you win. There are some very rare cases where a card like Pero can stop Wolf, but no one really runs Pero anymore. Frightfur Tiger is step 1 99% of the time in the full OTK push, for its job is to clear the field with its destruction effect, or at least remove more powerful monsters in favor of weaker monsters in terms of decks like Cosmos and Burning Abyss. I run 2 copies because despite Rabbit and Cat preventing Solemn Strikes from stopping Tiger, other traps do exist to prevent Tiger from going off, and sometimes 1 Tiger is just not enough. Frightfur Sheep is a solid field control choice that forces your opponent to spend resources to remove it from the field, as well as being a nice combo breaker for deck archetypes like Burning Abyss and Cosmos due to its Armades-like effect. Also, as a level 5 fusion, it can be summoned via instant fusion and used as a bridge to summon Sabre-Tooth. I run 2 copies. Not much to say about Toy Vender. Obviously running it at 3 is advisable due to Wings combination. One thing that some may forget about Toy Vender is if a Fluffal monster is drawn off of its on-field effect, any monster in the hand can be special summoned, not just the drawn card. If a Fluffal control deck existed, then Fluffal Crane would be a strong centerpiece. Unfortunately, for Crane, Fluffals are a much better rapid-fire OTK fusion deck, because it doesn't have the monsters to produce advantage or control the field generally required of a control deck. Frightfur Fusion is definitely worth running, but I only run it at 2. While it's a solid card, it loses some of its importance in this build due to the fact that I only run 1 Imp Chain, and I run Rabbit and double Cat. Also, running it at 3 can produce inefficiencies due to the lack of available material in the graveyard, especially due to the Wings draw combination, usually removing at least 2 to 4 of those potential fusion materials. And that graveyard material is what really drives the advantage of this card, because you typically don't have a lot of on-field material. Suture Rebirth is just not good enough because all it does is provide 1 more fusion material, but the effect negation pretty much mitigates a lot of the value of the card you get. Some like Frightfur Factory, but in my opinion it does not offer anything unique or important to the deck over a simple polymerization, because the continuous nature of the effect is of limited value in a deck like Fluffals that is designed for a single turn push more than a continuous put a fusion on the field this turn, put another fusion on the field next turn, put a third fusion on the field on turn 3, and because the material cannot be taken from the graveyard like Frightfur Fusion, Frightfur Factory has limited utility in that second potential fusion summons. Also, the fact that you have to prime it with a fusion-based spell in the graveyard significantly hurts its efficiency because it always has to go second in a sense. The simple reality is that Fluffal Cat is pretty much just better than Factory because it does exactly what Factory does 99% of the time, as well as acts as a fusion material. Maybe in the future when there are better Frightfur cards and running Imp Chain at 3 is actually helpful in my opinion, this card will become more meaningful. Designer Frightfur is only slightly better than Suture Rebirth, but nowhere near good enough to warrant running in my opinion. Frightfur March has lost a lot of its usefulness because defensive targeting elements have lost a lot of steam in the current meta for obvious reasons. Overall, March will be a dead card more often than not. Even when March can be activated, the payoff is marginal at best. At least it is for this build. Rounding out the remaining monsters, I like running the aforementioned 3 copies of King of the Swamps due to the name substitution effect and the faster polymerization search effect over Owl, and 1 copy of Glow Up Bulb for some synchro shenanigans, which can be especially useful when an effect veiler comes down on your Tiger or Wolf. For the spells, I like running one copy of Raigeki, but pass on the one copy of Soul Charge due to the cannot attack restriction, and obviously I run 3 copies of Polymerization. I'm a firm believer in 3 copies of Polymerization, Fluffals over 2 copies, because it's a fusion deck. Get a little inefficiency here and there because, once in a while I'll have an extra Polymerization. Who cares? You want to get it as much as possible. While some may disagree, I feel Fusion Conscription is a far superior fusion material search card over Fusion Reserve. Fluffals want to act now, not later, and while some may argue that the inability to use the search for cards effect is too detrimental, I find the ability to get the material in hand a turn early for the actual fusion play can spell the difference between victory and defeat for this deck at a significant enough rate that running 3 copies of Fusion Conscription is warranted. The additional effective reserve to retrieve a graveyard Polymerization is of little consequence in my opinion because of Fluffal Cat. I run 2 copies of Instant Fusion to both get more fusion material on the field via Norden's special summoning effect, or get Sheep on the field to facilitate Sabre-Tooth summoning. Also, I run 1 copy of Upstart Goblin. The extra 1,000 is of little consequence. 1 copy of One Day of Peace. People who are aware of my deck builds or know where I stand on One Day of Peace. And 1 copy of Foolish Burial to dump Wings, Gloat Bulb, or Imp Sabre into the graveyard depending on what is needed at the given time. Closing out the spells, I run 2 copies of Creature Swap, for sometimes your hand just doesn't materialize, or the opponent sets a large amount of back row that may make you a little concerned about bringing out your big fusion FTK combo, and you need to buy some time by snatching a powerful opponent's monster. Also, Creature Swap can remove annoying obstacles that stand in the way of your OTK using your normal summoned monster as the trade material. Also, Creature Swap can end a domain lock as well by taking control of the only tributed monster your opponent may have on his or her field. Now, I don't main deck Twin Twisters in this deck because for some reason that I still really don't understand, a lot of decks no longer run Vanity's Emptiness, eliminating it as a long-term threat against Fluffal Fusion, and most of the back row belong either to the Mirror Force family or the Solemn family, and the Cat-Rabbit combo sidesteps the strikes, and Tiger can take care of the Mirror Forces. Therefore, I only side Twin Twisters in this build, largely to go up against Domain Monarchs. Finally, I run 4 traps, 1 Vanity's Emptiness, and 3 copies of Drowning Mirror Force. Drowning is nice in this deck because, again, with Creature Swap, sometimes you just don't get what you need, or your opponent stuffs your fusion plays. But with the number of spells this deck runs, you can set a number of bluffs, significantly increasing the probability of getting Drowning off successfully. For the remaining extra deck, I run 1 Elder Entity Norden, 1 Odd Eyes Burst Meteor Dragon, just in case you need help getting over those Cosmos or Burning Abyss for your big OTK push, when you don't have Sheep available. 1 Naturia Beast, 1 Hi-Speedroid Chanbara, more OTK fun, 1 Photon Strike Bounzer. I still like Photon over that new number 24 monster that comes out in the future. 1 number S39 Utopia the Lightning, and 1 number 39 Utopia. In the end, Fluffals have a lot of things going for them. Draw power, searching, fusion recursion, card destruction, effect neutralization during the damage step, and anti-destruction field control. However, their one glaring issue is they are a fusion deck. Thus, they are heavily dependent on Polymerization and its subsidiaries. Also, unfortunately for Fluffals, the change in the meta has hindered their OTK strike ability due to the additional anti-targeting and/or anti-destruction monsters available, meaning that Fluffal players have to be more conscious in their planning over past formats where plays basically amounted to summon Tiger, nuke the field, then summon Wolf, and win. Well, that's my Fluffal deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.